Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's go ahead and knock this out. Alright, first question. Thoughts on Jefferson deadlifts versus conventional, and any possible benefits and drawbacks to the lift? Cheers. I really don't see the point of doing a Jefferson deadlift. When people say, what are the possible benefits? None, other than you happen to enjoy doing it. There's no reason to think that this can actually replace the conventional deadlift as an overall size and strength builder. It's just a different exercise. It's an oddball lift that some people like to do. So the benefit to doing it could be that maybe you're just sick of doing deadlifts for a little while. You want to put some sort of different exercise into the rotation, but overall, no, I don't think it's going to be as good of an exercise. Again, the whole thing of the staggered stance, the uneven loading, even going back and forth with it the way that people do, which is what you would need to do. I just don't think there's any benefit to that. Just like I'm not a fan of people doing unilateral work and a lot of the split squats and other stuff they do. I just don't think that they are comparable as primary exercises. I just don't think it offers the same potential for balanced loading, maybe even the awkward stance for it in some cases. I'm not saying that's automatically the case. Could even potentially be more of an injury issue in the long term. But again, I just don't see the point. I don't see the benefit. I don't see why anyone would do it, other than maybe they're just bored with deadlifting and they want to try something a little different for a little while, just for fun or something like that. But I wouldn't really take it seriously as an exercise outside of just doing something for a little bit of extra fun. That's just the way I look at it. I don't see any real, actual, tangible benefit to doing it compared to the conventional deadlift. All right, next question. Hey Jason, what is your take on hanging from a bar for a certain amount of time after training? I heard it's supposed to be good for your lower back, and since I now go back in the gym after a back injury, I started implementing it. Only problem I have with it is that it somehow hurts, strains my shoulders a bit. What could be the reason for this? Thanks. The only reason it's going to hurt or strain your shoulders is maybe you have some mobility issues or just shoulder weakness. Now, the interesting thing is that it can actually help with your shoulder mobility. In other words, hanging from that bar, if it's hurting your shoulders a bit, is a sign of being immobile, and the actual hanging from the bar might actually help with that over time. And again, you could also just have weak shoulders relative to the body weight that you're hanging. Now, as far as doing this is something I actually do. I actually hang from a chin-up bar, particularly after a heavy squat or deadlift day. I feel like it just decompresses my back. It makes my lower back feel better, and it feels to me like there's some recovery benefits there. Now, can I prove that? Is there evidence of that? No. And it could just be placebo effect. Or it could just be that, again, it's just stretching my lower back and everything out a little bit to do it. And it feels good. It's something I personally do. And sometimes it feels nice. It just feels sometimes like a nice crackling through the back, and everything kind of cracks stuff into place. I overall do it myself, and I actually like it, and it's comfortable. And so I totally get where you're coming from. I don't know. I just feel like it decompresses my lower back a little bit to hang a bit. Because again, I have a relatively heavy upper body. I do a lot of really heavy work, a lot of heavy deadlifting, a lot of heavy squatting. And so for me, it feels like I get some benefits out of it. Whether they're real or just in my head, who knows? But, by that same token, we get into placebo effect. Even if it is placebo, it might still be helpful to the placebo effect. So nothing wrong with it. It is what it is. All right, next question. Given the compiled data by Greg Nuckols, do you still stand by your beltless training recommendations? Yeah, I do. I know, again, Greg feels the way that he does about belts. I feel the way that I do about belts, and I just don't see enough compelling evidence to me that belted training has that many benefits outside of being able to train with a belt. Again, and it just has to do with the fact that it's using something artificial to brace your core. And I don't know, in my experience observing myself and other athletes over the years, is that when I see two athletes who rely too heavily on a belt, when you take the belt off of them, they don't have strength anymore. Whereas in someone who trains without a belt, when you put a belt on, they get the strength benefits from the belt, and they can learn to use it very, very quickly for a meet. And it's not something that takes that much effort for them to learn to use. And this is one of those arguments that's going to go back and forth, but at this point, I've seen no data at any time that would suggest to me that my observations so far are wrong. And so the thing is, with something like this, I have a bias here, but that bias is based upon a couple decades of watching lifters over the years. It's not something that I just came up with myself. It's not my own idea that I just decided upon. It's listening to a lot of coaches over the years and observing athletes. And the simple fact is, I just see too many guys out there who train with a belt and rely on it so heavily that when they take the belt off, they are weak, and it's shockingly weak. And it just shows me that belted training doesn't carry over to unbelted training to the degree that beltless training carries over when you put a belt on. And I'm not even saying that I'm right. I could be wrong, and you know what? More data may come out later, but I haven't seen any data ever take the time to address the point that I just made. And until it does, again, we come back to the point of I would rather be well-rounded strong than just be able to compete on a powerlifting platform and nothing else. And I mean, I think it's good to be able to compete on a powerlifting platform. I think it's good to be able to compete in a competitive environment. But I think that we should, as anyone who wants to be truly strong, they need to be well-rounded in their strength. They need to be well-rounded in their strength, and that includes being able to do things that aren't just a powerlifting meet. And that's the difference. All right, next question. Jason, keep up the great work. It's really making a difference. Do you have any recommendations for good breakfast options that you've used over the years? I personally can't stand stuff like oatmeal and haven't had much luck finding healthy and filling alternatives. Cheers. Well, here's the thing that you need to think about too. Are you eating to follow your cultural norms, or are you eating for the purpose of enjoyment, athletic performance, body composition, whatever? In other words, what is a breakfast food? If in your country or your culture, I'm assuming you're British with the cheers, had brown rice, chicken, and broccoli become a popular breakfast food, we'd be calling that a breakfast food. What's classified as a breakfast food is dictated purely by your culture. It's dictated purely by your culture. And you know what? Usually the breakfast foods are foods that can be prepared quickly. That's what we think of these days, a little bit of oatmeal, some cereal, stuff like that. Well, if you're trying to eat for body composition and athletic performance, you could always have chicken in the refrigerator that you cooked a day or two ahead of time. I usually cook 4 or 5 pounds of chicken breast at a time myself. That lasts me more than a day. I don't eat that in one day. I rarely eat that in 2 days. So having that prepared ahead of time, Greek yogurt, fruit, bread. I mean, you could have bread, whole wheat bread, ready at any time right there. Have chicken breast already cooked up. Make a chicken sandwich. You could eat some Greek yogurt and fruit. If you don't want to cook anything, you don't have time to cook, you just want to eat first thing in the morning, Greek yogurt or any type of yogurt, some bananas, you're good to go. It doesn't have to be classified as a breakfast food by your culture for you to eat it for breakfast, and don't constrain yourself in that way. You know, it's like I had a guy tell me before that he couldn't follow a muscle building diet or change his body composition because he was Mexican and he had to eat Mexican food. And you know, I'm just like, bro, just don't put the cheese on your food. You'll be fine. He goes, but I have to. I'm Mexican. You see the problem there? You're allowing a cultural constraint to dictate to you that you have to eat specific foods all the time. And by the way, you know, his argument was silly because it's you can eat a lower fat option and still eat culturally appropriate food for your culture. But the point is that you're not restricted by that. In other words, you don't have to eat foods that in the UK are classified as breakfast foods in the morning. Just like a person who's of Hispanic descent living in Texas doesn't have to eat Mexican food for 4 meals a day and have to put cheese on it. It's an option. You can eat whatever you want, whenever you want. All right, next question. Hi, Jason. I've had great success on the 10x3 program you recently ran yourself. There are days where I have less time. I was wondering if doing 4x6 that day would be an acceptable substitute. I'd attempt to use similar loads. Thoughts? It's not going to be quite as effective, and it comes back to the point of, remember the data that we looked at, that the high sets of triples produced equal hypertrophy to the 3 sets of 10, but with more strength gains than Brad Schoenfeld studied. So you might gain a hair less strength from those. However, it'll still work if you have days where you're on a time crunch and you're trying to run a program like that. I don't think it would be a bad thing. And, and particularly it changes up the loading parameters a little bit every now and then. Now, I will say to you, you're probably not going to be able to do 4x6 always with the exact same weight you do for 10 sets of 3. You might have to reduce the weight slightly, but that's okay. It'll still be fine. It'll still work out. In some cases, you might be able to replicate the weight, though, because you're only doing 4 sets. But, yeah, you could use it, and it'll be fine. Just if you were to do it too frequently, don't expect to gain quite as much strength as you would off of the triples. But again, time constraints being a factor, yeah, you could do it and get away with it. I don't see an issue with it. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 3.